Well, people were actually live and on time this time for Talkin' Thrones Season 3, past the midpoint, Season 3, Episode 6, The Climb. I can officially say that this is probably like the first, like after the Battle of Blackwater, like the first like really great like visual spectacle showcase episode. Pat, what are your thoughts on that?
Hey, listen, Dom, I think the Talkin' TV family can agree with me that we're climbing to the top of this season, right? We're about to see the end of the stuff, right?
The jokes are back. Let's bring it. It's been a hot minute since Pat has cracked one of those.
Yeah, a lot of chaos. We're just, climbing right towards it. And hey, some people don't get the chance to climb.
Indeed. All of that and more. Stay tuned. God damn, I just got to give Chris another shout out because again, it's been too long and I haven't given him enough of a shout out for that. Chris unfortunately won't be on this week's episode of the Talkin' TV podcast, but man, he did such a kick-ass job with that theme song. But yeah, Pat, Season 3, Episode 6. We're here, dude. We are chugging along. We're almost completely done with Season 3. It still feels like yesterday that we were just wrapping up, that we were at this point in Season 2. I remember Season 2, Episode 6 was, this was at that point where we were like, oh man, this is really just taking its time towards the Battle of Blackwater. And I definitely think that without a doubt, this was the point in the show where we were starting to, where definitely there were things needed to be upped just a little bit. We were on the road to the Red Wedding. People, of course, didn't know what the Red Wedding, what it was going to be or whether it was going to happen just yet. And I can safely say that this is the point after last week's awesome, incredible episode that this is an episode that has a lot of great moments. Again, this is a visual marvel as far as just episodes go. But it's definitely the point where we're like, okay, we need to pick up the pace a little bit because there's a lot of moments here that I'm just like, okay, we could still be going with this. But again, it ends with, it has probably, it's very similar to 2 episodes ago where the kind of the first half of the episode is meh, but the final sequence that ends this episode is like one of the best things that the show has ever done. I don't know. What's your thoughts on that?
Hey, yeah, I think this episode, I agree with you. It starts off at the bottom and you work your way up to something that's pretty exciting. So maybe the story structure of this episode is like a ladder as well.
Right.
So it's one of those things like, hey, there's great scenes like Tywin and Olenna. You got, obviously Littlefinger, what he says to Varys, about the climbing and all that stuff. So
obviously the actual physical climb that Jon and the wildlings make up the wall.
Exactly. So there's a lot of memorable moments here that I would say that people, that saw the series, maybe they're not recapping it, or maybe they are with us. And, it's one of those things that these moments are ones that you remember, well beyond the show.
Yeah, indeed. It's one of those ones where, again, like looking back, I remember the Littlefinger speech really well. I love the Tywin Olenna moment. And like the actual climb itself, like, again, how it's framed. This is the second of 4 episodes that's directed by Alex Sakharov. Famously started as a DP for The Sopranos and directed one of my favorite episodes from last season, What Is Dead May Never Die. He directs this episode, and then he directs two of one of the best episodes of the entire show next season with The Laws of Gods and Men, the Tyrion trial episode. That's going to be a lot of big ones there. And also famously directs another episode that is memorable, strangely in its own way, Mockingbird, which is the episode where Littlefinger kind of low-key reveals that he instigated the plot of this entire thing and then kills Lysa. But this episode is, again, I don't know. I guess we just got to break it down honestly, because again, the way that it's very interesting, kind of the structure of this episode, where the way it kind of progressively builds and builds and builds without you even realizing it. So we start off north of the wall. Quick scene. We check in with Sam and Gilly as they're continuing their trek down north of the wall. Again, this is really the point where they're just like, okay, we're just stalling for time until we get.
I don't remember this scene, and I literally just watched it an hour ago.
A reason, and I think there's a reason why, because it's just Gilly criticizing Sam for not being able to make a fire. Sam showing her the dragon glass. Yeah. They don't know its importance yet. She doesn't care.
It's like Gilly's like, hey, move the big logs, and he does, and then he passively aggressive says, well, at least you know your fires, you know, or something like that. So like I now kind of vaguely remember watching this. I might, to be honest with you, I might have been paying attention to my fantasy football team at the beginning of this episode. But hey,
it makes sense. It's not a very impactful opening. It's just about, I think the only thing that really comes from this scene is like Sam establishes like, oh, how high the wall is, which is then obviously visually confirmed in the next scene when what's it called, when the actual you see the wall for the first time when they actually start climbing.
Yeah, he says some of it's hidden by the clouds. I remember that sentence for sure. So I guess I was half paying attention. But it's, setting the picture, how grandiose the wall is, because we've seen it from, Castle Black and we've seen them sort of embodying their base. But we haven't really approached it from the way that the wildlings would see it. And since that's the theme of this episode is climbing over this wall, making this dangerous climb to get to the other side and sneak across and really, set up a surprise attack on the Night's Watch. Basically it's setting the stage, setting that seed really early on in this episode to give you something that's visually stunning by the end of
absolutely.
And
again, it pays off because the next scene we see is Jon and the wildlings preparing to climb the wall. And again, this is it's really interesting because I don't outside of like a major battle, I don't think that any other Game of Thrones episode is really structured an episode this way, where rather than have the big action set piece be at the end of the episode to top it off, right, as we would get in later episodes, rather the action is framed, or rather the rest of the storylines are kind of framed around this big action set piece where we keep cutting back to it progressively throughout the rest of the episode, where it starts off right with them at the base of the wall and Jon having that conversation with Ygritte, and Ygritte being like, okay, she kind of confesses after teasing and jostling him a little bit.
Well, yeah, they're doing the whole, lovers teasing,
quarrel. Yeah, but it ends up being more than that because she ends up revealing that she knows that he still has some form of allegiance to the Night's Watch, but she also kind of inherently knows, like, she clues him in that she's smarter than the Night's Watch. She knows that he also does truly have feelings for her. In a way that, like,
what's her exact phrasing? Like, I'm not as
not as dumb,
stupid
as your pretty southern ladies or something like
that. Yeah, the women in silks and all that type of stuff. Right. And the main thing that she says is basically it's like, you're loyal to the Night's Watch, I'm loyal to Mance, but they don't care about us. We're just soldiers in their war, and the main thing is we need to stay loyal to each other. And I think that's one of the things that makes this storyline that we're embarking on between the two of them, between Jon and Ygritte, so fantastic, is the fact that they should keep that bond of loyalty to each other. They should throw away, sort of that, the traditions of the Night Watch and the wildlings and that conflict, and really look out for themselves. But as we'll see as the episodes go on throughout the next season, we'll find out that that's really easier said than done.
Yeah, we'll find that. Yeah, unfortunately, again, with how tragically that storyline ends. My biggest takeaway from this is that for me, the reason why Jon's time with the wildlings was for me the most kind of fulfilling part in his journey is the fact that besides that it was prepping him to be a leader in a way that he wasn't even realizing or ready for, it allowed him to kind of spend time with the commoners. A big kind of underlying theme that I see happening throughout, both the book that this is based off of, A Storm of Swords, as well as throughout season 3, which predominantly adapts the bulk of A Storm of Swords before we get to the last half, is that a lot of the characters do spend time with a lot of the commoners, and they do begin to understand, last season was different. They were all kind of in the middle of an action. It was wartime. They were kind of trying to figure out, just pick a spot in order to kind of survive and wait at their corner of the war while not actively waging sides. But this season definitely interacts a lot of the major characters, who for the most part all pretty much highborn, with a lot of the lowerborn. Arya with the Brotherhood, Jon with the wildlings, Daenerys with her encounters with the slaves, even Bran to an extent with Jojen and Mira, and Jaime in his journeys throughout the Riverlands, even in King's Landing with Marjorie making more of an attempt to interact with the commoners in ways that the Lannisters and the Tyrells weren't in the last season. And the biggest, and that again, it adds a lot of perspectives to them. It adds a lot. It helps them understand a lot more about ruling, what ruling is, a lot of just the common practices. And the thing that's also the great framing device that helps propel this episode just in general, besides that idea, is Littlefinger's kind of chaos is a ladder idea at the end, which is the idea that, again, he almost takes the opposite perspective, where a lot of these characters have not had a lot of interaction with the commoners, but because Littlefinger did come from that, and because he wants to do everything he can to get away from that lifestyle, because he's been and he's seen humanity at its worst, and he doesn't ever want to go back there. He will do whatever he can in order to ensure that that happens, and that is by kind of creating this endless cycle of chaos for which he is always seemingly on top, that he is always seemingly at the master. And it's kind of a great, I think, metaphorical companion to the literal visual companion of climbing the wall, which is just, again, this unbearable, beast of nature that has no sympathy towards, towards those that are just trying to survive and climb over it. It's a really interesting metaphor for life just in general as they climb over the wall, right. As the crack happens, as Jon saves Ygritte, and then once they make it to the wall and they kind of see the other side, they see the horizon as to what's coming next. It's beautifully framed how it's done so, and he really does a good job of kind of illustrating, I think, both that visual metaphor and literal.
Yeah, but I think it's also a character metaphor for Jon because, obviously he is the bastard son of Ned Stark, and now he's making this huge climb, with the wildlings, and, he's basically risking his life to save Ygritte. And, the whole thing is like, if the world is chaos right now, right? Even in his world where the Night's Watch and the wildlings are against each other, that's very chaotic. And he's climbing the ladder, in that world. He's going to, as we know, become the commander, the Lord Commander. And so the fact is, like, he's, putting all his energy, risking death to basically make this climb. And he's also, that's the climb he's making towards his leadership, as you put it, of the Night's Watch.
Yes, absolutely, indeed. And again, I love the shot that it ends on with them at the end, where after Littlefinger's made his speech and they're standing on top of the wall, they look out, obviously they look north and they kind of see all the lands north, and then they look south and it's this beautiful picturesque green, and then obviously they start making out because they have to, but because of course that's required. But yeah,
that keeps the romantic storyline going. That's very key to the next season. So.
Of course, definitely. Yeah, we haven't read a comment in a while, but Eric brought up something really interesting where Storm of Swords kind of splits similarly to Dune, but somehow Game of Thrones season 3 is a lot less feeling like half a story, but maybe that's because it's a show we're expecting to leave us on a cliffhanger. To an extent, yes. I think the only major difference there is that Dune literally only adapts the first third of the novel, at least the movie that we saw, versus season 3 is 3/4 of the novel of Storm of Swords. Like, season 4 is literally like the back half, like from Joffrey's wedding and death all the way to the end, like, of season 4, which is where book 3 ends. It's like, it's not even a full quarter of the book. Like, that's how much it is. So that's a predominantly bulk of everything that's going on. We got a couple more just stopping just in general. That's the thing that I like, is that every other storyline, it really is microscopic in comparison to this, and it feels quick. We stop it in the north. Oh man, just everything going on here. I'm like, I feel like we could just cut. I'm like, we don't need this. We get it. We get the idea.
Well, I think you need Bran and his merry band of people traveling beyond the wall.
Right.
They're not even beyond the wall right now.
No, they're not. They're still in the north.
They're still on their way to the wall. Jeez.
They haven't even made it to the wall yet.
Fast forward in my mind, but hey, basically, it's Mira and Osho at each other's throats over the rabbits.
Yep.
Like, it doesn't look like
skin a rabbit.
Yeah, and OSHA proves, like, if it was a contest, I saw that movie Army of Thieves on Netflix, and
how was that?
Yeah, not as good as Army of the Dead, but
damn, that's disappointing, because Army of the Dead fucking ruled.
It's still fun. So check it out if you want, and I can't wait to hear your review if you're going to do that here on the channel. But mainly, it's like the character basically opens a safe in like eight seconds flat, and so does OSHA with this rabbit, skin it in like 8 seconds flat. So she was going to win a contest for skinning rabbits. She was going to beat Mira, pretty much 99 times out of 100.
Right. But then Mira was always going to get that 100. Then Bran just basically tells him to stop arguing. And then it's one kind of interesting scene, but not really, where Jojen has a seizure. And then that Mira's like, the visions take their toll. And like, again, that's just one of those moments in hindsight where I'm like, I don't know. Friggin'.
Yeah, well,
if Jojen has seizures, why doesn't Bran? Is that just something that was like intrinsic to him that doesn't really have anything to do with the seizures?
I guess Bran is not really having too many visions at this point. They're just sort of dreams and him controlling the animals. So also, it could just very well be that, he Bran is stronger than he is in terms of these capabilities, or maybe he just has physical health issues, and the fact that these powers are also there combined. I guess they never really explain it, so it is like kind of a potential loophole that doesn't make any sense. But yeah, just go with it. Suspend your disbelief, and
at least for this moment.
Yeah, I think when Mira kind of like coddles him and is like, "Oh, I'm right here, and I don't know. It's not necessarily something that I remember going forward as a big story point. This is sort of, as you just put it, like kind of thrown in there.
Yeah.
But like, hey, it's maybe it just sets up the fact that he's fragile and he'll be killed at some point.
I don't know. But like the big takeaway.
Don't get too attached.
Yeah,
because,
don't get too attached. I feel like I'm quoting the Suicide Squad. I feel like the Suicide Squad pretty much like borrowed Game of Thrones' like entire mantra, which was "Don't get attached." But oh man, Eric's also getting into Army of Thieves, saying, "Yeah, it wasn't Army of the Dead. I liked, but Army of Thieves wasn't great." And he said even Missandei couldn't save it. Wow, look at the eyes right there.
Hey,
yeah,
listen,
she just jumped in on the action show.
Yeah,
right
Army of Thieves was probably a half hour too long, and Missandei, very interesting casting for an action type heist movie. She kind of pulls it off for sure, but really, like I've never seen a heist movie with someone who just has like this fantastic, optimistic demeanor the whole entire time.
Yeah,
like,
right. Gotta love the Dieter character. It makes me miss him even more. He was probably my favorite character from Army of the Dead, just in general, because that guy was so much fun. But real quick, back to Talking Thrones and Game of Thrones, just in general, the show that we're actually.
Well, hey, listen, there is a crossover here with the Missandei actually acting in Army of Thieves. So
indeed, yeah. So
worth a detour.
The only other storyline that we had to cover in the North, oh man, we're back. Your favorite. We got a break from it last week, but unfortunately, we have to keep doing it. The Theon torture stuff. This is the point where we're past the intrigue. We know that this is just torture for torture's sake, and yeah, friggin'.
Well,
Ramsay,
this is probably the best torture scene of the thing because it only gets worse from here. So basically, Theon is asleep, and what's his face, Ramsay. Blows the bullhorn and wakes him up, and he has a parched throat. He wants some water, and Ramsay does the whole "I pour the water on the floor" type of thing. So it's like he's really just toying with him, and he decides to play another game, and that's all this scene is just one big game for Ramsay, and it's guess who I am, guess where you are, guess why I'm torturing you.
But as it goes to show, ultimately, as he says, if you think that this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention, because the thing that's established
that's a great line.
It's one of the best lines ever. It's totally just like, I feel like that's that they consulted a George R.R. Martin, right? And he's like, George, we know you didn't actually write out this sequence in the books. It was only alluded to off screen in later books, but like, come on, just give us a juicy one liner there. And he's like, all right, like, because that is a George R.R. Martin one liner if I ever heard one. Because it's why it's so good, because it doesn't make any sense for Ramsay as a character to say something like that. But it's still so awesome. It so illustrates just like exactly what it is that he's going for, which is there really is no rhyme or reason or motive for why he's torturing Theon. He's just doing it just because he can, like kind of almost the reasoning for why Theon is being tortured as far as him taking over the North has almost been forgotten. And like kind of as he's found himself in like this new depth of hell, just in general, you don't want to talk about just taking a rung out of that ladder of chaos right there.
Yeah, Eric in the chat is basically wondering if the Theon scene that we've been leading up to happens next week or not.
That you would be correct. That is indeed next week.
Oh, it does happen.
It does happen next week.
So our audience here, the Talkin TV family, should save the date. It's Theon's favorite toy goes away.
The loss of Theon's favorite toy.
Yeah, it's oh my god. Maybe we should skip that episode.
Maybe.
It's really,
I don't know. Well, no, that's also the one with the Jamie Brienne bear pit scene, and I do like that scene.
Okay, so I can at least maybe I'll just pay attention to fantasy football during the Theon scene, and just pay attention during the Bears scene.
Yeah, but ultimately, again, that's the big takeaway here. Theon, again, he guesses incorrectly after incorrectly. First he guesses Deepwood Mott, and then he's like nope, and then he's like Last Hearth, and he's like, do I look like an Umber to you? And then he gets his car hole that he does successfully manage to guess that he is being held somewhere in the north, and at least he thinks that he's being held for betraying Rob of the North. But of course Ramsay factors in. He's like, oh, you forgot to guess one thing. You forgot to guess that I'm a liar, and then goes.
That's definitely after Ramsay plays along with him. It's like, oh, you got that one right. You're right. Blah blah blah. And then he springs the liar on him, and it's one of those things where like, this is the perfect embodiment of who Ramsay is. And no matter what happens, like from the moment he's introduced to the moment that he feeds his hounds, so to speak, his character stays true to this very malicious, evil character that you just love to hate. It's like, this is a despicable person, no doubt.
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, like you love to hate him because he's so charming, at least from an actor sense, but his character is probably the most despicable character because, again, he takes all of kind of the twisted everything that Joffrey has. Again, there's a reason why Joffrey takes a backseat this season after having such an imposing part last season, but combines it with like this cruel, sick sense of intelligence ultimately that Joffrey does not possess.
Well, this is one of the things that's very interesting is like tracking how sadistic are some of these bad guys, like, because you have Cersei, you have Ramsay, two of the biggest bads of this show besides the Night King, and it's like they'll go through anything to get what they want, and which one does the more cruel actions, or takes the more cruel actions, like hey, Cersei does a little bit of unfortunately terrorism in King's Landing towards the later seasons. That probably kills off a lot more people, or at least in a much crueler way than Ramsay, he's just about torture. He's just about fighting his armies. She's just like, they're disposable. So like the morals of some of the characters, including in the final season where we see Dany's morals sort of shift. It's like, are we comparing Ramsay, Cersei, and Dany all in one sort of category? We'll have to see as the show goes on.
Yes, indeed, ultimately. But so that leaves us off with the North. So then we cut to the Riverlands again. Just some brief sequences that happened here before. Again, it surprises me how much stuff actually does happen in King's Landing. But we check in with Arya, who's training with the Brotherhood. She's training and shooting bows and arrows with Anguy. Anguy, again, still one of the greatest names and one of the best characters in the show that ultimately just disappears after this season. Never to be seen again. He's given her kind of, some extra tips, kind of more of like a pseudo commentary on Rob and on Jon in the first episode. But who arrives? Melisandre, ultimately up to no good as per usual. The thing that I love about this sequence right here and what transpires is it ultimately shows that it's like, nah, what Melisandre does, that's not exclusive to all the Red Priests. It's just her own like kind of twisted nature just in general. She goes, she has this conversation with Thoros. They obviously know each other. Well, not necessarily know each other, but they have this common lineage. Obviously, going back to the Temple of Ashai, it kind of clues us into a little bit of Thoros's past and history, and him, what got him in King's Landing in the first place. They go to see Beric, and she's almost surprised to see that Beric is alive and has been resurrected as many times as he has. And there's a little bit of interesting commentary here, which is how it illustrates the difference, because Melisandre, it almost always seems like her faith dictates her actions, but with Thoros it's literally the opposite, where Thoros gives this big long speech about how
he has his backstory,
his backstory, where he had completely he had completely lost his faith ultimately until he saw Beric fall in battle, and he spoke the words because he just happened to know them from when he was younger, and then he saw them resurrect Beric, and it kind of like restored his faith just in general. So what
do you say? It's like, I said the old words not because I believed in them, but because
they were the only ones I knew, and he was my friend.
Yeah. Exactly. And then, that's when I started believing that the Lord of Light actually exists. And, even though he's not necessarily going on a crusade like Melisandre is, he definitely believes in the Lord of Light, believes that there's some sort of plan, and is following it in his own way. And that makes it amenable for Melisandre to make a deal with them. Hey, we'll give you the money because the Lord of Light wants, Gendry.
Or at least her own version thinks that she wants the Lord of Light for Gendry.
Yeah, so the Brotherhood is, kind of willing, hey, Gendry is going to go help the Lord of Light. That's good by us because he keeps bringing, me back and, hey, that's all good.
Yeah,
and then
but
we
obviously
also get money.
there's a but again,
You know?
it's a slight problematic because again, there's a financial aspect involved. She could have just as easily paid them without the whole Lord of Light backstory and spiel. And I have another problem too because again, I'm noticing here that a lot of the things that they try to pay off from earlier seasons and later seasons, a lot of those things happen here, and they're not very paid off. Well, first with the what's it called with Jojen with the seizures. And then with Arya and Melisandre, because Arya, of course, this is just continuing with her disillusionment with the Brotherhood, right? She keeps,
they'll meet again, and they do.
They do. And don't forget you can't forget the prophecy. Ultimately, brown eyes, blue eyes, green eyes that she'll shut forever, and that they will meet again. It's like, wow, you couldn't be more vague if you tried there. And that's one of those things where it's like, I don't necessarily remember off the top of my. Oh wait, no, it didn't happen in the books because this entire fucking sequence is made up. This entire thing was made up. Like Melisandre never crossed over, met with the Brotherhood in the books. That never happened. It was completely made up. What happened is again, it's another one of those infamous consolidation of characters where Benioff and Weiss, there was another one of Robert's bastards named Edric Storm that Melisandre constructed another shadow baby to kill another guy when they were trying to take Storm's end. And then they ended up getting Edric Storm, and he had been living on Dragonstone and, being friends with Shireen. Melisandre and Stannis were going to sacrifice that guy, that bastard. Melisandre never left Dragonstone. There was never any going to get Gendry or anything. And Davos sets that bastard free, ultimately. And that's when, what's it called? And that's how that storyline goes in the books. This entire thing is made up. So this entire thing is ultimately fabricated which I guess is what kind of makes the payoff even lamer in the finale. But I don't know. Look, what's your take on that?
Well, I think, for the show, I think, it kind of gets us from point A to point B, right? The whole leech thing has to happen and the three people have to die, which even that, is kind of lame because two die relatively within a reasonable time frame.
Right. And then we gotta wait until the end where it's like, oh, so that's supposed to be a clue that Arya kills the Night King? Really?
Well, no, I think the third leech is, what's his face?
No, we're talking about the leeches. Sorry, my
bad. Yeah, Papa Greyjoy, and
and it takes an extra 2 seasons. After died.
Yeah, I know we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves, and I'm kind of trying to keep it on the down low because we're going to talk about it as it happens. But the Leech storyline, it just happens. It's part of it. I think it's just in any TV show, you're trying to have the characters do something and take actions and do what they think is best. And it seems like Melisandre and Stannis are going to be sort of relatively on the back burner for a little bit, at least until they invade north of the Wall. So everything that's happening, between Blackwater and the moment where they kind of at the end of next season. Basically, all that stuff is sort of just like simmering on the back burner. So having Melisandre find Gendry, having them go back to Dragonstone, having them have this prophecy, and some of it comes true and whatnot. It's just giving those characters something to do. Just like Davos is learning to read right now. It becomes important later on, but at the same time. He's just sort of hanging out in prison. So, it's one of those things where
it's so funny because
things to do.
Yeah, it's so funny because I always thought that Davos was in a decent amount of episodes this season, and he's only in 4. Ultimately, it's not that many. But we got 2 more storylines to cover in the Riverlands. One, we check in with Jaime and Brienne briefly at Harrenhal. It's only the one sequence. Oh my god.
Yeah, it's Bruce Bolton, right? He's basically
Bruce Bolton showing off and flexing where
he's having dinner with Jaime and Brienne. And I love this part. Jaime's just like stabbing the piece of beef with one hand,
and Brienne's trying to help him out, but ultimately she just slams her hand down. And Bruce ultimately says he's like, obviously, I would, what I should be doing is I should be delivering you to Rob. And Jaime's like, but you haven't. So what are you actually doing? And he's like, it is like wars cost money, and we need the gold. And he's like, so I will return you safely to your father for a profit. And Jaime tries to get Brienne to come with him, and she's like, oh no, Brienne's going to be staying here. She has aided and abetted treason. ultimately, and so she will not be going. What? So obviously, let's talk about this real quick.
Let's talk about the best part, right? Jamie says that won't do. Brienne's coming with me, and Bruce Bolton just says, "Oh, you overplayed your
and then he stopped,
position,
and then he's the position."
right?
I'm like, "Oh man, that was great."
Yeah,
that was
I think again, the writing in this episode is spot on. Because even though this is a small scene, the whole leading up to the overplayed your hand, but he pauses and changes his phrasing.
Do you think they structured that entire dialogue scene around that one line and the one kind of changed pun ultimately?
Of course, they it was whoever wrote that scene, did a great job. It's the writing throughout this episode is spot on.
Yeah, again, this is Benioff and Weiss come back to write this episode, and I'm not going to say that it all works, but the moments that do, they really, really work. Because, oh man, that line is brilliant ultimately. But I wanted to ask, so Bolton, obviously, we know, has been in some communication with Tywin Lannister, right? That's why he's, there's a reason why, there's a reason why, oh my God, fucking brain today. There's a reason why, ultimately, that Tywin has not been making as big a fuss about Jaime in King's Landing. So, so he leaves Brienne there. Obviously, he intends to leave her with Locke ultimately. So that's just him tying up loose ends, right? Making sure, again, Brienne is somebody that could potentially be a threat to Cat, a threat, obviously, to the pending Red Wedding ultimately. So you think that he's just eliminating a potential threat, or do you think he just doesn't even consider her of consequence and he's just getting rid of her?
No, I think at this point, they're never going to confirm or deny type of thing, in this story that Bruce Bolton is plotting already for the Red Wedding. But I think it's pretty clear that he is, right? They're never going to show that to us, the directors and whatnot. But, obviously he's returning Jaime, which is what Tywin wants. And then he's going to get the lordship of the North.
Right.
And I do think that Brienne, being of Tarth is that is one family that you definitely don't want to come across. And, obviously she's, young enough, she's strong enough. She is probably going to be the fiercest combatant of that family, and she's already pledged allegiance to Catelyn Stark. So she is an enemy. Bruce has a target on, sees a target on her back. And as you talk about the bear pit that's coming up, it's a simple way, not the cleanest way, but it is a way to get rid of Brienne, which could snowball into some sort of problem for them in their plot to stabilize the kingdoms, I guess. For the Lannisters and the Boltons.
Yes, indeed. And ultimately, it's a good thing that Jaime comes back to save her next episode, because it ultimately, I think, kind of erases what could have been a huge problem ultimately for for both the Boltons and the Lannisters going forward. So, hey, look at that. It's the small moment. But one more scene in the Riverlands, ultimately just continuing in the slow step down to the Red Wedding. So, at this point in the show, right, with Robb cutting off Rickard Karstark's head at the end, the Red Wedding is basically assured at this point. It's just kind of waiting it out, right? Obviously, he has the meeting with the Freys. Ultimately, lame Lothar and Black Walder, they seem to be, playing it very cordial, right? He promises them Harrenhal. Of course, Edmure is still trying to throw buck talk. Poor Edmure, he's still trying to flex just wherever he can, just in general, and nobody is having any of it. It's good to see that, even seasons later, when Tobias Menzies makes his return in season 6 and then the final season, everybody takes him just about as seriously as they did initially, which is that Edmure is trying to buck talk. He's trying to back off, but Robb reminds him who is in command. The Freys negotiate. They want Harrenhal, and they want Edmure to marry one of Walder Frey's daughters in place of Robb. And Edmure throws up resistance for why? Maybe you can clue me in on this. I'm is it a show of humiliation? Is it just him trying to hold on to some vestiges of pride? Does he not like Walder Frey? Does he not understand how the game is played? That whole sequence to me, I'm just really, dude? Really? It's just it's the most pitiful act of just childlike, resistance to something just in general,
Well, I think Edmure, this is his character, right? He's not necessarily leader of the pack,
To say the least.
Yeah, so I think it's one of those things where it kind of, he wants to negotiate, right? He wants to haggle for his pick of whatever daughter Walter Frey is going to offer. And, it's let's deny him. He's been, at me for my lifetime to marry one of his daughters. So we'll deny, and then he'll come back and let me choose. And everybody there says that's not how the game's played. The Blackfish wants to like just punch him in the face, pretty much.
Understandably so.
Yeah, and basically, they bring up the windmill, right? He took the windmill, the stone windmill, and that lost Rob a major victory. And hey, it's like if you want to make amends for this, just say yes, just marry whatever daughter it is, and let's move on. And that's really where the scene ends. With him agreeing under peer pressure, so to speak.
Yes, absolutely. It's again like it's a small piece just in general on the way there, but it's a rather humorous moment. And again, it's like the next couple episodes we really don't see much of them because I think the next episode is just them marching, and then I think episode 8 I don't think they're episode 8 sorry they they arrived there and it's at this point again it's just the slow descent down the train. It's funny because I think I remember seeing a meme. It's like somebody at this point in the show will like right before they were about to begin season 3, they're like, "Oh, I don't see how Game of Thrones go past season 3. Ultimately, it just seems like that like Rob's gonna win the day, Joffrey's gonna die at the end, and then they're just gonna go north to win Ramsay." And I'm like, "Oh man, hindsight is 2020, huh?" Just in general, but yeah. So we wrap up ultimately in King's Landing. Again, starts off again. Just the little moments here, again, with the slow, like, kind of political game that's happening back and forth between the Lannisters and the Tyrell. This whole scene is just Tywin Lannister. It's just Tywin Lannister and Olenna Tyrell, the two super old, like, powerhouses of their respective clans, just flexing on each other. And it is so deliciously well written. It is so incredible, like, how they're trading barbs back and forth. Tywin, trying to call out, Olenna calling Cersei too old. Tywin, criticizing Loras's blatant homosexuality. Olenna bringing up the idea of Jaime and Cersei's incest. And ultimately, it ends with the ultimate trump card of. And here's the thing: is that even though they are flexing on each other, Olenna does have some legitimate concern with that. She understands that. It's funny because this is another change they make in the books. In the show, Marjorie and Loras are the only Tyrell siblings, but in the books, Loras has two older brothers. One of who, the older of whom, is who they're planning to marry Sansa to, obviously, because and that's the thing in the books is that there's a reason why Loras kind of exclusively sticks to the warrior lifestyle. Loras is immediately granted the Kingsguard position in the books because everybody kind of knows about his latent homosexuality, so they're not trying to like make any vows on him. Here, though, Loras is the only inherent male heir to Highgarden, and so they know that the Tyrell name dies if Loras does not have any heirs. So obviously, Olenna's main concern comes from the fact that Loras may not be able to have any heirs with Cersei because Cersei just might be too old, ultimately. Tywin obviously doesn't believe this, but in order to kind of assuage Olenna, but also in order to get her on his side, he threatens to, ironically enough, make Loras a member of the Kingsguard, which would therefore forfeit any vows ultimately, and ultimately kind of rob Olenna of any future Tyrell heirs, ultimately. She tries to throw back.
It's very interesting, this sequence, because obviously, we'll put him in the Kingsguard. But the way that it is already, like they both know that Joffrey is not really the legitimate king.
Right.
And, this is sort of talked about in this dialogue, that, if the incest is true, then Joffrey's not really the king.
Right.
And it's all about perception. And so even though, Cersei may not be able to bear another child, that's what Olenna is sort of driving at. That doesn't matter. If Loras is married to Cersei, you can literally just pluck a child in there and call them a Lannister or Tyrell and, be on your merry way. Like the family can still retain power generations upon generations based on a lie. And, but if you put him in the Kingsguard and he has a vow and he can't have any family, it's going to be a harder lie to tell that he had some sort of kid, despite being, basically bound by this, vow that he takes.
Yeah,
so
it's a good thing that they didn't. It's a good thing that they didn't have paternity tests in the Middle Ages because that would have cleared up. So, but half the heirs probably wouldn't have even been the real heirs.
Yeah. So it's very interesting. Like I feel like the dialogue here and just like what they're talking about is so rich that you can sort of, just read in between the lines and expand on what they're talking about. There's a lot of basically just planning that's going on here that is they're thinking about they're playing a game that I don't think anyone else in the show really is thinking about. Like
Right.
their experience, their wisdom, and
yeah. And they even make a comment on it. They're both old, and they're both way too old to theoretically still be alive. But the fact that they're like, yeah, there's a reason why the two of us are the two people essentially running this whole shindig. It even brings to mind another scene from next season when Mace Tyrell tries to interject with a comment, and Olenna just flat out tells him, "Not now, Mace." Like you're like treating him like a child, even though he's like an old man, with grown children of his own.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's very interesting that to see how the relationship between the Lannisters and the Tyrells is working out, and of course, this is all about what we seen last week, which was Cersei marries Loras, and then basically Marjorie then can marry Joffrey, and this leads into
and then Sansa marrying Tyrion, which leads into
exactly.
Interesting sequence. Again, we haven't had one of these really since the beginning of the season, where Tyrion and Cersei have this commentary, this back and forth, where Tyrion asks if he's still in danger, ultimately, and Cersei tells him that because again, it's been so long that we've almost forgotten, but Tyrion is still interested in who attempted to assassinate him.
Oh yeah, he asked Cersei straight up because.
But at this point, again, he's figured it out ultimately, because he's like, look, and again, this is another thing that again was kind of cut from the books, but also again the translation from the books was going to be difficult because it was primarily inner monologue, which is that Tyrion figures it because Tyrion's also figuring that whoever placed the assassination attempt on him was more than likely the same person who tried to do the assassination attempt on Bran last season. And he's like, look, Jaime would have done it himself because he wouldn't let anybody else do his dirty work. And Cersei would have been too smart to let something like that get traced back to her. So ultimately, he figures out that it was Joffrey ultimately that was behind it. And he asks Cersei straight up, he's like, am I in danger? And she's like, no. Now that Tywin is back in the city, Tywin again has a control over things that no one else really does. She's like, you're fine. Ultimately, you don't have to worry about this. And ultimately, again, they have another interesting back and forth where they're just trading insults and barbs. Ultimately, where he's like, I can't imagine what would happen once Jaime gets back. Ultimately, because at this point, like everyone kind of knows it's only a matter of time before they find Jaime and before they get him back. Where Tyrion is like, I think that if Loras ever does try to make a move on you, he's gonna find himself coming down with the case of sword and throat or something like that.
Yeah, Tyrion is again. Laying down the one-liners in this scene, and I think it's again another well-crafted sequence because at first he is asking Cersei like, "There's only two people that could do this. Like, was it you?" And Cersei doesn't answer, and Tyrion, like you said, figured it out. So he's like, "Okay, well then it was Joffrey," and they go into like how stupid Joffrey actually is and how he can't even scheme properly. And it goes again to my theory, like, when people can't play the Game of Thrones properly, they end up dead. And Joffrey has proven time and time again that he's not cunning.
No knowledge or conception.
He really doesn't know what the consequences of his actions are. And, taking Ned Stark's head was, mistake number one. Trying to kill Tyrion was another mistake. Not just because now Tyrion's sort of, wondering if his family even wants him there or not. But it's also because he did it in such a way that, the soldiers in the army actually know what Joffrey did and that he had tried to have Tyrion killed. So it's like the king and the hand of the king are having some sort of petty squabble. And that's sort of a problem if there is sort of this instability from a leadership point of view, specifically since all the army knows that Tyrion is the one that saved everybody at Blackwater. So, you tried to kill the hero of Blackwater, so like now your armies are going to fight for you. Like maybe not. So it's one of those things where Joffrey doesn't really think 3 moves ahead.
Yes, ultimately. It becomes very apparent. And then it's followed up by the next scene where, again, a couple of awkward interactions, right? They keep trying to play up this, Sansa with one of the Tyrells ultimately, but those scenes are starting to become more and more dull. You just have this one kind of funny sequence between her and Loras where they're trying to relate, but Loras clearly just has no interest in her. It's kind of funny because Loras is played up as like, this heartthrob, this vision, that every woman wants ultimately, but then it shows that like he really is not good when it comes to small talk. Ultimately, he would rather let his sword do all the talking. But both of them just in general. And what's it called? It's followed up by a very awkward encounter where Shay is dressing Sansa. They're talking about God only knows what or who cares. And Tyrion walks in and again, he's trying to make some statements. Obviously, Sansa's still unaware that Shay and Tyrion are involved. You know, she makes the comment. Ultimately, you know, Tyrion tries to downplay it. And it's the moment where Tyrion ultimately has to confess that they're being married. And even though it doesn't, we don't actually see it happen, it's the buildup is just awkward enough where you can tell.
Yeah, like, Tyrion is basically like, you know, the moment when you hear something and it should have been said in a different way, and you know, he's basically doesn't want to tell Sansa that the two of them are now engaged in front of Shay, and he's trying to get Shay to leave so that he can tell her privately. But, you know, once he gets back into that corner, you know, he's just stammering and doesn't really know what to say, and kind of trying to avoid it until he just kind of blurts it out. And, you know, yeah, it doesn't really go well for him in this scenario.
No, unfortunately, it does not ultimately. But it cuts to, again, like, the ending shot where we end this episode with in the throne room. Ultimately, Varys walks up to Littlefinger, and this scene is just dynamite all around. So here's what I'll say ultimately in conclusion before we get to this sequence is it's another one of those episodes similar to last week where the individual moments that happen are so brilliantly written, so brilliantly executed. It's just kind of how they're all tied together where I don't know what it was. There was something about last week that just had a cohesiveness that I felt like was missing from this week ultimately. And it may have just been the framing device of which it was centered around versus like kind of all these awesome, intense, super intrinsic character moments last episode as opposed to kind of this episode. It's kind of like these micro moments that are all framed around this one giant action set piece. But it's kind of Littlefinger and Varys kind of trading barbs back and forth as far as, you know, their individual plotting and scheming last episode ultimately. You know, Littlefinger revealing that he knows that Varys had Ross planted as you know, as a spy for him, and how he attempted to make the play with the Tyrells with Sansa, and how Littlefinger was able to thwart that with the Lannisters, and ultimately reveals that they ultimately reveals that Varys reveals that he did what he did for the realm, kind of again continuing to show off, you know, their individual, where they're coming from, even though, you know, they're supposedly these very mysterious characters that want what they want for their own gain. And you kind of like see the illustration of what it is that Varys fears about Littlefinger, where Varys at the end of the day, he does care about the little people. He does care about kind of preserving, you know, kind of this idea of law and order, because otherwise everything will fall into chaos. And Littlefinger reveals, he's like, bring it on. I am the agent of chaos, essentially. You know, he's like, bring on the chaos.
Ultimately. Well, I think one of the things is like, he talks about, you know, chaos is the ladder, and it gives people the opportunity to climb and secure a position in the world. And, you know, one of the things is that he says that, you know, many people don't climb. They basically, you know, cling on to their gods. They cling on to their duty to the realm. They cling, you know, he even throws in the whole idea that what Varys is doing, you know, for the realm as something that's a hindrance to Varys, you know, his personal gain.
Well, I feel like the most impactful point about this speech is that it illustrates the entire theme of the show, which is all of these people making all of these plays for all these positions of power, ultimately kind of whatever their intrinsic reasons are for doing it. And where Varys is coming at it from kind of like a geographical standpoint, where he's like, we have to do what we can for everyone so that everyone can best preserve it, or else everything falls into chaos and disarray, and that will ultimately be worse off for everyone. While Littlefinger is from the opposite perspective, where he's like, look, things are going to be shitty no matter what we do, just in general, because there's always going to be something that comes up. So at the very least, I'm just going to take a piece of it, what I can, for myself ultimately. And it's easier to do that when things are in such chaos, because when that happens, then somebody who nobody would expect can kind of arise from the ashes. It's very almost Targaryen-esque, if you will. And I have the speech right here where it's, chaos isn't a pit, chaos is a ladder. Many who try to climb it fail and never get to try again. The fall breaks them. But some are given a chance to climb, but they refuse. They cling to the realm or the gods or love, illusions. Only the ladder is real. The climb is all there is. It's really interesting because I feel like this ultimately kind of is the ultimate breakdown of capitalism. Again, pardon my getting into politics here, but it kind of, you know, the breaking down of ultimately capitalism versus communism, and kind of where they apply to the intrinsic human spirit, where at the end of the day, humans by nature are driven by one thing, which is survival. And they're always going to ultimately be trying to get kind of the one leg up over the other in order to preserve what they can, whether it be for themselves or a group of others that they feel and care for, ultimately. And all these niceties that we've kind of, provided in society, ultimately, there are always going to be those who try to look through the loopholes and exploit something in order to try and get to that, ultimately. And I think that's what this show best illustrates, is trying to maintain that fine line between order and chaos. And the ultimate difference between Varys and Littlefinger that's represented, that kind of represents the two focal points of the entire show, where neither side is ultimately right, is what one does in order to toe that line, and then what one does in order to, break it, ultimately, in order to benefit themselves. I don't know, what's kind of your take on that?
Hey, it's, I think you summed it up nicely. It definitely speaks to the themes of the show. And as we go on reviewing the rest of the seasons, we're going to continue seeing this chaos. And I think one of the best parts about it is, in season 4, we do see Joffrey's death, and I don't think we get it revealed until season 5, that, who actually, was part of the plan. But, spoiler alert, this is a recap show, but, Littlefinger, was one of the conspirators in there. And it's, he basically says, why did I betray my allies? Well, because they could never track it back to me, and it would thrust them into chaos, and that would be a great distraction for them, for him to achieve his own goals. Right. And so I think it his character continues this idea that he sets forth in this episode until his storyline reaches the climax.
Yeah, it's ultimately kind of disappointing, because you're right there. Joffrey's death is kind of meant to be signified as the next stage in his grand plan to kind of take over everything, where, again, it kind of started right with the death of Jon Arryn, that Lysa that kind of provoked and brought the Starks into the fray. But that was ultimately kind of only so that he could get Catelyn for himself and kind of remove Ned from the fray. But now he's ultimately trying to throw things off with the Lannisters by allying with the Tyrells in order to kill Joffrey and throw everything into the fray, while he ultimately gains control over the Eyrie. But then we introduce him back into the North, and that's when things just get topsy-turvy. But again, that's for later on down the road. But that was our recap of season 3. Episode 6, entitled The Climb. Episode 26. Only 4 episodes left of season 3. Only 3 more until the Red Wedding. We're moving along, Pat. We are ultimately moving along. We hope you guys had a great, fun, and safe Halloween. Ultimately, we've only got 2 months left of 2021 after today. That is crazy, just in general. This year went by so fast. So fast, just in general. So that's it. Pat, where can the good people find you?
Hey, listen, I'm here on Talkin TV, and I'm talking Thrones, so you can definitely check me out here each and every week when we do this thing. And hey, I have an Instagram account at Patrick W. Huber. I might use it, might not use it, who knows. But go ahead and follow me if you like. And one day when I decide to do something on social media, you'll see it.
Absolutely. And you can, of course, follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Movie Nerd Reviews, as well as Talkin TV Podcast, where I post each and every single day, twice a day, advertising for you, the people, just in general. And, of course, you can continue to support us by clicking the subscribe button, clicking the like button, clicking the bell next to it. That way you guys get notified every single time we put up new content. We'll be back next week for episode 7. And, as always, people, stay frosty, 12 seasons of a short film, and watch more fucking movies, and be braced, because winter, just in general around here, is indeed coming. We'll see you guys next time.